Who let this janitor in here? Get out!
Sir, I can fix the server.
Fix it?
Derek Holloway slammed his palm on the table.
You can barely fix a mop bucket. Security!
Just give me 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
Derek's laugh echoed across the conference room. A $5 million demo frozen on a black screen.
You're just a walking bottle of bleach. Do you think you can fix it by using your brain to clean the server?
Carter Adams stood still, hands at his sides, eyes steady. Get out.
Get out! Go clean the toilet. That's all you're good for.
The Meridian delegation watched.
$5 million was disappearing from the conference table. Let him try. We have nothing to lose.
Just minutes later, everyone would be stunned by the janitor's actions. They truly wouldn't know who he really was. Pinnacle Software occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower on Market Street, San Francisco. The company had spent 6 years building enterprise cloud solutions, burning through 2 rounds of venture capital and clawing its way to a reputation just credible enough to attract serious clients. Now, on the second Tuesday of October, everything Pinnacle had built was riding on a single afternoon. The client was Meridian Corp, Fortune 500, global logistics. Their tech infrastructure spanned 42 countries, and their annual IT budget exceeded what most startups would see in a lifetime. The deal on the table was a $5 million contract for Pinnacle's new real-time analytics platform. If the demo went well, Meridian would sign before the quarter closed. If it didn't, Pinnacle's board had already discussed layoffs. Nathan Cole, Pinnacle's CEO, had made this clear in Monday's all-hands meeting. He stood at the front of the open plan office, sleeves rolled to his elbows, voice steady but eyes betraying the weight behind every word. Tomorrow is not a pitch. It is a proof of life. Meridian's CTO is flying in personally. His name is Raymond Bennett. If you've been in this industry longer than 5 minutes, you know that name. He built the backbone infrastructure for 3 of the largest cloud migrations in corporate history. He does not suffer fools, and he does not give second chances. Nathan paused, scanning the room. Every system online, every dashboard functional, every pixel perfect. Questions? No one raised a hand. Behind Nathan, leaning against the wall with his arms folded, stood Derek Holloway, IT manager, 8 years at Pinnacle. Derek ran the server infrastructure, the network stack, and the deployment pipeline. He was good at his job and never let anyone forget it. He wore tailored shirts, kept his badge clipped to a lanyard that read Infrastructure Lead, and walked the hallways like a man who believed the building would collapse without him. Derek had one particular habit that everyone noticed, but no one challenged. He treated Carter Adams like furniture. Carter was the night janitor. He arrived at 6 in the evening and left at 2 in the morning. 34 years old, broad-shouldered, quiet. He moved through Pinnacle's hallways with a mop and a rolling bucket, earbuds in, head down, invisible by design. He had a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie who stayed with a neighbor during his shifts. He never complained, he never called in sick, he never spoke unless spoken to. And Derek spoke to him often, though spoke was generous. 3 weeks before the demo, Derek had stopped Carter in the hallway outside the server room. Carter was mopping a coffee spill that one of the developers had left outside the door. "Hey, janitor." Derek didn't use Carter's name, never had. "You missed a spot near the east bathroom, 3rd stall. Go back and redo it." Carter had already cleaned that bathroom twice. He nodded anyway. "Yes, sir." "And when you're done, the break room trash needs emptying. Someone left a sandwich in there and the whole floor smells like a dumpster." Derek wrinkled his nose. "Actually, you probably can't tell the difference." 2 developers nearby heard the remark. One coughed into his hand. The other stared at his screen. Neither said a word. It was always like this. Small cuts, delivered casually, in front of witnesses who pretended not to see. Derek once knocked a stack of papers off a table as Carter was mopping beneath it, then said, "Oops, Guess you've got more to clean. He once called Carter the help while on speakerphone with a vendor. He once told a new hire, gesturing toward Carter, "That's the janitor. Don't bother learning his name. He won't be here long." A week before the demo, it got worse. Derek was walking a group of visiting consultants through the office when they passed Carter restocking the supply closet. Derek jerked his thumb toward Carter and said, "Janitorial. We keep the service staff out of sight during client visits, but sometimes they wander." The consultants laughed politely. Carter kept his eyes on the shelf. His jaw tightened, but his hands stayed steady. The following Friday, Derek found Carter wiping down the kitchen counter during lunch hour. 3 engineers sat at a nearby table. "Did I not tell you to do this after hours?" Derek said, loud enough for the table to hear. "Nobody wants to watch you scrub while they eat." "The morning shift asked me to cover." "I don't care what the morning shift asked. When I say after hours, I mean after hours. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." One of the engineers, a young woman named Tessa Walsh, looked up from her sandwich. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it. She stared at her plate until Carter left the room. Carter absorbed it all. He had learned long ago that silence was cheaper than conflict when you had a daughter depending on your next paycheck. The night before the demo, Carter was finishing his rounds on the 14th floor. The offices were empty. The conference room, where tomorrow's presentation would take place, gleamed under LED panels. Carter had polished the table, vacuumed the carpet, and aligned every chair with the kind of precision most people reserved for operating rooms. At 11:15, he pushed his cart past the server room. The door was propped open, which was unusual. Normally, it stayed sealed with keycard access. Carter glanced inside. Rows of black server racks hummed in the cold air, status lights blinking green and amber. But one sound didn't fit. A high-pitched whine, barely audible beneath the hum of cooling fans. It came from the third rack on the left, the primary application server, the one that would run tomorrow's demo. Carter paused. He knew that sound. He had heard it before, years ago, in a different life. It was the sound of a cooling fan losing its bearing, which meant the CPU was running hotter than it should, which meant something underneath was pushing the processor harder than the load warranted. He set down his mop and stepped toward the rack. "What are you doing in here?" Derek's voice came from behind him. Carter turned to find the IT manager standing in the doorway, coffee in hand, tie loosened, face tight with irritation. The door was open. I heard something from the third rack. A fan whine. It might be none of your business. Derek stepped forward, positioning himself between Carter and the servers. "This room is restricted. You're here to empty trash cans, not diagnose hardware." "I understand, but that fan noise could indicate..." "Could indicate what? That you've been watching too many YouTube tutorials?" Derek set his coffee on a shelf and pointed toward the door. "Out. Now. And don't touch anything in here. Ever." Carter looked at the blinking amber light on the third rack one more time. Then he picked up his mop, backed out of the room, and continued down the hallway. Derek watched him go, took a sip of his coffee, and closed the server room door without checking the third rack. The next morning, the 14th floor buzzed with nervous energy. Fresh flowers on the reception desk, a catering team setting up coffee and pastries in the conference room, developers running last-minute checks on their laptops. Nathan Cole paced near the elevators in a navy suit, rehearsing his opening remarks under his breath. At 10:15, the Meridian delegation arrived. 5 people, 3 directors in dark suits, a CFO with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm, and at the front, Professor Raymond Bennett, CTO of Meridian Corp. 61 years old, silver-haired, wire-rimmed glasses. He had taught distributed systems at MIT for 15 years before crossing into the private sector. He shook Nathan's hand with the firm grip of a man who had evaluated 1,000 pitches and remembered maybe 12. The group settled into the conference room. Nathan opened with a polished overview. The development lead walked through the platform's architecture. Slides transitioned smoothly. The room felt cautiously optimistic. Then came the live demo. The lead developer clicked Launch Dashboard. The screen filled with real-time data streams, dynamic charts, and interactive filters pulling from Pinnacle's production servers. For 15 minutes, everything performed flawlessly. Bennett leaned forward, nodding at the latency metrics. The CFO made notes in her portfolio. One of the directors murmured to the person beside him, "This might actually work." Nathan allowed himself a quarter smile. At the 16-minute mark, a chart froze, then a second one. Then the entire dashboard went white. A loading spinner appeared. It spun for 10 seconds, 20, 30. The screen went black. Someone whispered, "Oh no." Nathan's quarter smile vanished. He turned to Derek, who was already on his feet, phone pressed to his ear. "What's happening?" Derek's face had lost its color. "The primary server. It's not responding. I'm calling the team." Within 3 minutes, 6 IT staff members crowded into the server room. They ran diagnostics. They checked cable connections. They argued over terminal windows. One engineer suspected a network partition. Another blamed the database layer. A third suggested rolling back to a previous build. They tried all three. Nothing worked. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. 20. The servers stayed down. The demo screen stayed black. In the conference room, Bennett checked his watch. The CFO closed her portfolio. One of the directors pulled out his phone and began typing, probably an email to the next vendor on the shortlist. Another director leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, the universal posture of a man who had already made up his mind. Nathan Cole stood at the head of the table, $5 million evaporating with every passing second, and felt the floor tilt beneath his feet. 2 open questions hung in the silence that followed. The first was technical. What had gone so catastrophically wrong that an entire IT department couldn't find the answer? The second was moral, and it lived in the hallway outside the conference room, where a janitor in a gray uniform had just heard the commotion and set down his mop. Carter Adams grew up in East Oakland, in a 2-bedroom apartment where the radiator worked only in November and the hot water gave out by 7 in the morning if you weren't first in line. His mother, Gloria, cleaned offices downtown from 4 a.m. to noon, then watched other people's children until dark. His father died in a warehouse accident when Carter was 6. The insurance payout covered the funeral and 2 months of rent. After that, Gloria worked a 3rd job on weekends, folding laundry at a hotel on Broadway, and told Carter the same thing every night before he fell asleep. Your worth doesn't shrink just because someone can't see it. Carter believed her, not because the world confirmed it, but because she lived it. Gloria never raised her voice, never missed a shift, and never once let Carter see her cry, though years later he would realize she must have done plenty of that behind the bathroom door after he went to bed. When Carter was 12, he found a broken desktop computer in a dumpster behind the public library. It was a beige tower, scratched and missing its side panel, with a cracked motherboard and a dead power supply. Most kids would have left it there. Carter carried it home in a garbage bag, set it on the kitchen table, and spent 3 weeks bringing it back to life using a soldering iron he borrowed from the school shop teacher and a repair manual he checked out from the library's reference section. The machine booted on a Thursday evening. Gloria came home from her cleaning shift to find her 12-year-old son sitting in front of a glowing monitor, grinning wider than she had seen since his father was alive. From that point, Carter never stopped. He built his first local network at 14, connecting 3 salvaged machines in his apartment so Gloria could track her work schedule from the bedroom. At 16, he won a citywide science competition by designing a low-cost server cluster from recycled parts. The judges, all engineers from Silicon Valley firms, gave him a standing ovation and asked where he went to school. When he told them Oakland Unified, 2 of them exchanged a look that Carter wouldn't understand until years later. A look that said, "This kid shouldn't be this good given where he comes from." He earned a full scholarship to MIT, computer science, with a concentration in network infrastructure and distributed systems. His professor in advanced systems architecture was Raymond Bennett, a man known for dismantling weak arguments with surgical precision and rebuilding them into something stronger. Bennett pushed Carter harder than any other student. He also wrote Carter the most emphatic recommendation letter of his career. "Carter Adams has the rarest gift in this field," Bennett wrote. "He listens to machines the way musicians listen to music. He doesn't just diagnose problems. He hears them before they happen." Carter graduated summa cum laude. He was hired immediately by Vertex Technologies, a mid-tier IT infrastructure firm in San Jose, as a network engineer. For 3 years, he thrived. He redesigned their monitoring stack, reduced server downtime by 60%, and earned 2 internal awards for innovation. His colleagues respected him. His manager trusted him. For the first time in his life, Carter felt like the world was starting to see what his mother had always seen. Then Greg Palmer happened. Palmer was a senior engineer, white, well-connected, friendly in meetings, ruthless in private. When a critical deployment went wrong and crashed a client's production environment for 9 hours, the logs pointed to a configuration change made from Palmer's workstation. But Palmer had access to Carter's credentials. He had borrowed them months earlier for a quick test that Carter, trusting a colleague, had allowed. Palmer rewrote the audit trail. He filed an incident report naming Carter as the sole operator. By the time Carter saw the report, HR had already scheduled his termination meeting. He walked in expecting to explain. He walked out carrying a box. No investigation, no appeals process. No one asked for his side. The termination letter used the word negligence. It followed Carter like a scar. Every application he submitted to IT firms came back rejected. Recruiters ghosted him after background checks. He was blacklisted without trial, convicted without evidence, erased from an industry he had given everything to enter. 6 months later, Carter took the only job that didn't require a reference. Night janitor at Pinnacle Software. $14 an hour, no benefits until 90 days. He took Sophie to school in the mornings, slept while she was in class, and cleaned offices while she slept. He never told her why they moved from a 2-bedroom apartment to a studio. He never told her that the man who mopped floors used to build the systems that ran on them. But every night after his shift, Carter sat at a secondhand laptop and read technical documentation, patch notes, architecture white papers. He kept his mind sharp the way a boxer keeps his hands fast between fights, not because a match was coming, but because stopping felt like surrender. Carter stood in the hallway outside the conference room, mop in one hand, spray bottle in the other. Through the glass wall, he could see the scene unraveling. Nathan Cole gripping the edge of the table, Derek Holloway barking into his phone. The Meridian delegation sitting in the kind of silence that precedes a verdict. You could hear fragments through the cracked door. Derek's voice, high and strained, echoing down the hall. "Reboot the whole cluster. Just reboot everything. Kill every process and start fresh." Carter's stomach dropped. A full reboot of the server cluster during a live session would wipe the demo environment's cached data. Every real-time feed, every dashboard configuration, every client-specific filter that had been preloaded for the presentation, gone. The system would come back up clean, but empty. It was the kind of panic-driven decision that turned a recoverable failure into a permanent one. Carter set down his mop. He pulled his earbuds out and placed them in his pocket. He looked down at his gray uniform, the name tag stitched above his chest, the rubber-soled shoes, the spray bottle clipped to his belt. He thought about Sophie, about the paycheck, about every reason he had to stay invisible. Then he pushed open the conference room door. 31 people turned to look at him. Executives in tailored suits, engineers in branded hoodies, directors with leather portfolios, all staring at the janitor who had just walked into the most expensive meeting of Pinnacle's existence, uninvited. "Excuse me." Carter's voice was low but steady. "If you reboot the cluster now, you'll lose the entire demo environment. Cached data, session states, preloaded configurations, all of it. It won't come back." The room held its breath.
Derek, who had been halfway through dialing his phone, lowered it slowly. His face shifted from panic to disbelief to something colder.
What did you just say? I said a full reboot will destroy the demo data. The issue isn't hardware failure, it's a software cascade. Multiple faults stacking on each other. I can hear it in the fan pitch from the hallway. The third rack CPU is thermal throttling because runaway processes are maxing the processor. A reboot won't fix the root cause. It'll erase the evidence you need to diagnose it. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Derek's neck flushed red above his collar. He stepped closer to Carter, close enough that Carter could smell his aftershave. "You're the janitor," Derek said, his voice dropping to a register meant to humiliate. "You clean toilets for a living. You push a mop. And now you're going to walk into a board meeting in front of our most important client and tell my engineers, my team, how to do their jobs?" Carter didn't step back. "I'm not telling them how to do their jobs. I'm telling you what will happen if you reboot. And I'm telling you to get back to your bucket before I have security escort you out of the building." Derek pointed at the door. "This is a restricted meeting. You are not part of it. You are not qualified to be part of it. Leave."
From the far end of the conference table, one of Meridian's directors muttered to the CFO,
"Is this actually happening?"
The CFO didn't respond. She was watching Carter's face.
Nathan Cole raised his hand. "Hold on." The CEO stood up from his chair. He looked at Carter, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since signing his employment paperwork 18 months ago. Nathan saw the gray uniform, the mop calluses on his palms, the spray bottle on his belt. But he also saw something in Carter's eyes that none of his 6 IT staff had shown in the past 22 minutes. Calm. Absolute, undisturbed calm. "You said you can hear the problem?" Nathan said slowly. "Can you fix it?" "Yes." "How long?" "Under 5 minutes." Derek let out a laugh that cracked at the edges. "Nathan, this is insane. He doesn't have server clearance. He doesn't have engineering credentials. You're going to hand him admin access to our production environment in front of Meridian's CDO?" Nathan looked at the black screen on the wall, then at the Meridian delegation. Bennett sat perfectly still in his chair, wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the dead monitor. His eyes had not left Carter since Carter entered the room. Something in Bennett's posture had changed. A slight forward tilt, the angle of a man who had stopped evaluating a product and started evaluating a person. The CFO was reaching for her bag. $5 million was leaving the building in slow motion, and everyone in the room could feel the draft. "Derek," Nathan said, "your team has had 22 minutes. The screen is still black. I have a room full of people from a Fortune 500 company watching us fail in real time. We are out of options." He turned to Carter. "What do you need?" "Terminal access to the primary server, admin privileges, and I need the server room cleared so I can work without crosstalk." "Then we're no worse off than we are right now." Nathan's voice was flat, final. He held out his hand toward Derek. "Badge." Derek stared at the outstretched palm. 3 seconds. 5. The entire conference room watched the IT manager, the man who had spent 8 years building this infrastructure, who wore his authority on a lanyard around his neck, unclasp his admin badge and place it in his CEO's hand. Nathan passed it to Carter. "Go." Carter clipped the badge to his belt beside the spray bottle. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the conference room, his rubber-soled shoes silent on the carpet he had vacuumed 12 hours earlier. Raymond Bennett stood. He buttoned his jacket and said, in a voice that carried quiet authority, "I'd like to observe." Nathan nodded. Bennett walked toward the server room. After a beat, the CFO followed. Then the 3 directors. Then Nathan himself. Then Tessa Walsh, the young engineer who had watched Derek humiliate Carter over a lunch counter and said nothing. Then Derek. who had no choice but to trail behind a procession of people about to watch a janitor attempt what his entire department could not. Carter entered the server room alone. The cold hit him immediately. 64 degrees, climate-controlled, the air carrying the metallic tang of overworked circuits. Rows of black racks hummed. Status LEDs blinked amber and red. The third rack's fan was screaming now, a high, thin whine that the IT team had apparently ignored while they argued about reboots. Through the server room's interior window, Carter could see the faces gathering in the observation hallway. Bennett at the front, arms folded, glasses catching the fluorescent light. Derek at the back, jaw locked. Carter sat down at the terminal. He swiped the admin badge. The console opened. A blinking cursor waited on a black screen. He cracked his knuckles once, placed his fingers on the keyboard. Took one breath. The clock on the wall read 10:53 a.m. Carter's fingers moved across the keyboard with the fluency of a language he had never forgotten. The terminal responded in green text on black, scrolling faster than anyone watching through the observation window could follow. But Carter could follow it. Every line, every timestamp, every error code buried in the cascade. He started with the system logs. 30 seconds of scrolling, eyes scanning left to right, absorbing data the way a radiologist reads an X-ray. Not word by word, but in patterns. He was looking for the origin point, the first domino, the thing that fell before everything else fell. He found it on line 4471 of the primary server's event log. A timestamp, 9:45 a.m., 70 minutes before the demo began. The DNS routing table had been corrupted during a scheduled maintenance script that ran automatically every morning. Normally, the script updated the lookup table with current production addresses and flushed stale entries. But someone had pointed the script's source file to a staging configuration instead of production during last week's environment merge. The result was catastrophic. Every internal address in the routing table now pointed to staging endpoints that no longer existed in the live environment. The effect was invisible at first. For the first 15 minutes of the demo, the dashboard pulled data from cached responses. But the moment the cache expired and the system needed fresh data, every request hit a dead end and bounced back to the origin server. The server wasn't failing because it was broken. It was failing because it was chasing its own tail at over 1,000 requests per second, each one generating a new error log entry, each error consuming memory, each memory allocation pushing the CPU harder. Carter pulled up the routing configuration and laid the active DNS table beside the production reference he reconstructed from memory. 6 lines of misdirected entries, each one pointing to an internal address that had been valid in staging 3 weeks ago, but meant nothing in production today. "Your DNS is routing traffic in circles," Carter said, his voice carrying through the server room's intercom to the observation hallway. "Every query the dashboard sends is bouncing back to the origin. It's like putting every car on a highway into a roundabout with no exits. The cars don't crash, they just drive in circles until they run out of gas." He typed 4 commands in rapid succession. Each one corrected a routing entry, replacing the staging addresses with the correct production endpoints. He didn't look anything up. He didn't open a reference document. The addresses came from memory, the same memory that had once managed routing tables for systems 10 times this size at Vertex Technologies. The terminal confirmed each change with a green acknowledgement line. Time elapsed, 58 seconds. Through the observation window, the junior engineer, Brandon Hayes, leaned toward Tessa Walsh, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's rewriting the DNS table manually. He knows the production addresses by heart. Our own team uses a cheat sheet for that." Tessa said nothing. She watched Carter's hands, broad, calloused from 2 years of mop handles and chemical buckets, and thought about every morning she had walked past him in the hallway without a word. The server's CPU utilization dropped from 97% to 61%. The fan on the third rack slowed from a scream to a steady hum. The amber light on the status panel flickered, then held green. But the demo dashboard still didn't load. The screen in the conference room remained black. Carter didn't pause. He didn't celebrate the partial recovery. He was already 2 layers deeper, inside the application runtime, reading the memory allocation logs. The analytics module that powered the demo's real-time dashboard had a memory leak. The module was designed to refresh its data visualization every 2 seconds, pulling new metrics from the database and rendering them on screen. Each refresh cycle allocated a new block of memory to store the incoming data. The problem was that the module never released the old blocks. It just kept stacking them, one on top of another, like a man filling glasses of water and never emptying any of them. After 15 minutes of continuous operation, which was exactly how long the demo had run before crashing, the module had consumed 11.3 gigabytes of RAM. The server's total available memory was 16 gigabytes. By the time the dashboard froze at the 16-minute mark, the application had been suffocating for at least 3 minutes, and every other process on the machine was starving for resources. Background services had crashed silently. Monitoring tools had frozen. The server's own health check daemon had stopped reporting because it couldn't allocate the 64 kilobytes it needed to send a status ping. Carter opened the module's runtime configuration. The allocation graph told the whole story. A staircase pattern climbing relentlessly upward with no drops. A textbook memory leak, the kind that any mid-level developer would catch in a code review. But nobody had reviewed this module. It had been pushed to production 48 hours ago to meet the demo deadline. Speed over safety. Carter had seen it before. He had once been fired for something exactly like this. Except that time, it wasn't his code that was broken. He didn't have time to refactor the module. Instead, Carter wrote a patch, 11 lines of script that forced the module to release its memory allocation after each refresh cycle, capped its maximum usage at 4 gigabytes, and added a garbage collection trigger every 30 seconds to sweep orphaned blocks. He typed the patch directly into the terminal. Each line landed clean. No backspacing, no syntax corrections, no hesitation between keystrokes. The code flowed out of him the way handwriting flows from someone who has spent decades holding a pen. Brandon Hayes pressed his face closer to the observation window. He's writing kernel-level memory management scripts, live, on a production server, without documentation, without a test environment. Tessa's throat tightened. Who is he? No one answered. But 2 people in the hallway already suspected. Nathan Cole had a strange knot forming in his stomach, and Raymond Bennett had taken off his glasses. Carter executed the patch. The memory graph dropped from 11.3 gigabytes to 3.2 in under 4 seconds. The server's response time halved. Queued processes began clearing. Services that had died silently restarted themselves. The machine was breathing again. Time elapsed. 2 minutes and 14 seconds. But the demo dashboard still showed nothing. The screen in the conference room, black. Carter leaned back in his chair for half a second, not to rest, to think. The DNS was clean. The memory was free. The server was responsive. So why was the dashboard refusing to load? He pulled up the network traffic analyzer and watched the data flow in real time. Within 5 seconds, he saw the imbalance. Pinnacle's demo environment ran on 3 server nodes behind a load balancer, a traffic controller that distributed incoming requests across all 3 machines to prevent any single node from being overwhelmed. Under normal conditions, the load balancer used a round-robin algorithm. Request 1 goes to node 1, request 2 to node 2, request 3 to node 3, and so on. But during the crash, the load balancer had defaulted to a sticky session failover mode, locking each user session to a single node. Every session created during the outage had been assigned to node 1, the only node that appeared healthy. The other 2 nodes had been marked as degraded and never reevaluated. The result, 92% of all incoming traffic funneled to node 1, the same machine Carter had just spent 2 minutes resuscitating. The other 2 nodes sat idle.
The dashboard wasn't loading because Node 1 was being crushed under the weight of connections that should have been split 3 ways. Carter opened the load balancer's configuration panel. He switched the algorithm from sticky session back to round robin. Then he reset the health check status on nodes 2 and 3, clearing the degraded flags. Finally, he flushed the session cache. 38,000 queued connections piled up during the outage. He typed the final command and pressed enter. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. The observation hallway went silent. Even the server room's hum seemed to hold its breath. Then the status lights on nodes 2 and 3 flipped from amber to green, one after the other, like runway lights activating before takeoff. The network traffic graph, which had been a single towering column over node 1, split into 3 even streams. The third rack's fan dropped to a whisper. The other 2 racks spun up, their cooling fans rising to a gentle, balanced hum. Carter opened a browser window on the terminal and typed the demo dashboard's URL. The screen filled with color. Charts rendered in crisp lines. Data streams populated, numbers ticking upward in real time. Filters activated. Heat maps bloomed across geographic panels. Every metric, every visualization, every real-time feed that had died 26 minutes ago came back to life, running faster and smoother than it had before the crash, because now the system was properly balanced for the first time all morning. Carter looked at the clock on the wall. 10:56 and 52 seconds. 3 minutes and 52 seconds, start to finish. He stood up from the terminal, pushed the chair back under the desk, and turned toward the observation window. 30 faces stared back at him through the glass. Nathan Cole's mouth was slightly open. The Meridian CFO had set her bag back down. Brandon Hayes had both palms flat against the glass like a kid at an aquarium. Tessa Walsh had tears at the corners of her eyes that she would later blame on the server room's cold air. Derek Holloway stood at the back of the group. His face was the color of ash. He looked like a man watching his own house burn from across the street. Raymond Bennett was at the front. He had removed his glasses during the second revelation and had not put them back on. He held them loosely in one hand, the wire frames catching the fluorescent light. His expression had changed from the careful neutrality he had worn all morning to something Carter had not seen directed at him in a very long time. Recognition. Bennett brought his hands together. One clap, then another. Slow, deliberate. Each one landing in the silent hallway like a stone dropped into still water. The CFO joined. Then a director. Then Tessa. Then Brandon. Then the applause spread through the entire hallway, and Carter could hear it through the reinforced glass of the server room, muffled but unmistakable. The sound of 30 people acknowledging something they should have seen a long time ago. Carter stood in the cold room, surrounded by humming machines and blinking green lights, and felt something crack open in his chest. Not pride, not vindication. Something older, something quieter. Something that sounded like his mother's voice, carried across 20 years, saying the words he had lived by even when no one was watching. Your worth doesn't shrink just because someone can't see it. He unclipped Derek's admin badge from his belt, right next to the spray bottle, and set it on the desk beside the terminal. Then he walked toward the door. Carter stepped out of the server room and into the observation hallway. The applause had faded, replaced by a silence thick with questions no one knew how to ask. He still wore his gray janitor's uniform. The spray bottle still hung from his belt. His hands still carried the faint chemical smell of the cleaning solution he had been using an hour ago. Raymond Bennett stepped forward. He moved through the crowd the way senior people move, without hurrying, without yielding, until he stood directly in front of Carter. Up close, Bennett looked older than he had through the conference room glass, more lines around his eyes, thinner at the temples. But his gaze was the same one Carter remembered from a lecture hall at MIT 12 years ago. Sharp, searching, and absolutely certain of what it was looking at. I know you, Bennett said. Carter's jaw tightened. He said nothing. Carter Adams, MIT, class of 2014, Network Infrastructure and Distributed Systems. Bennett's voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. I wrote your recommendation letter. I called you the best student I'd had in 15 years of teaching. I meant every word. The hallway went completely still. Nathan Cole, who had been standing 2 steps behind Bennett, turned slowly to look at Carter. Derek Holloway, who had been inching toward the back of the group, froze. I followed your career after graduation, Bennett continued. Vertex Technologies. You redesigned their monitoring stack, reduced their downtime by 60% in your first year. I cited your architecture in a keynote I gave in Boston. He paused. And then you disappeared. Carter's voice came out quieter than he intended. I didn't disappear. I was removed. I know. Bennett reached into his jacket and produced his phone. He held it up, screen facing Carter, showing an email thread. 6 months after you were terminated, Vertex's internal audit discovered that the configuration error was made from Greg Palmer's workstation, using credentials he had copied from your account. Palmer confessed during the investigation. He was fired. The audit report cleared your name entirely. Carter stared at the screen. His vision blurred for a moment. He blinked it away. They tried to contact you, Bennett said. The HR director sent letters to your last known address. They came back undeliverable. You had already moved. Carter had moved. From the 2-bedroom apartment in San Jose to a studio in the Tenderloin, because the 2-bedroom cost $1,700 a month and a janitor's paycheck didn't stretch that far. He hadn't filed a forwarding address because he hadn't wanted anyone from that life to find him. He thought the shame would follow the letters. Why didn't you reach out to anyone in the industry? Bennett asked. Why didn't you call me? Carter looked at the floor, then back at Bennett. Because the last time I trusted someone in this industry, I lost everything. My career, my reputation, my daughter's stability. I didn't know who was safe to call. Bennett removed his glasses. He cleaned them slowly with the cloth from his breast pocket, the same gesture Carter had watched him perform 100 times before a difficult lecture. It was Bennett's tell. It meant he was about to say something he considered important. Carter, I've spent 30 years building infrastructure, networks, systems, organizations. I've hired hundreds of engineers. I've watched thousands of demos. What you did in that server room just now was not competence. It was mastery. The kind that doesn't come from training. It comes from a mind that never stopped working even when the world told it to. He put his glasses back on. Nathan Cole stepped forward. His face carried the specific expression of a man who had just realized he owned something valuable and had been storing it in the basement. He looked at Carter, then at Derek, then back at Carter. How long have you worked here? Nathan asked. 18 months? 18 months. Nathan repeated it like a sentence being read aloud in court. And in 18 months, nobody, not HR, not your manager, not a single person on this floor, thought to ask what you did before you picked up a mop. The question hung in the hallway. Nobody answered it because everyone knew the answer, and the answer was ugly. Derek shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. I had no way of knowing. That's exactly the problem. Nathan's voice was quiet, controlled, more damning than shouting. You didn't know because you didn't look. You didn't look because you didn't care, and you didn't care because of what you saw when you looked at him. Derek said nothing. There was nothing to say. The hallway was full of people who had watched him mock a janitor for 18 months, and every one of them was looking at him now with the expression reserved for someone who has been publicly, irrevocably wrong. Carter stood in the middle of it all. His hands hung at his sides, the same hands that had held a mop at dawn and rebuilt a $5 million system before lunch. For the first time in 2 years, He didn't lower his eyes. The conference room reconvened 30 minutes later. The demo ran flawlessly from the beginning, smoother, faster, and more responsive than any rehearsal Pinnacle had conducted. Charts loaded in under a second. Data streams flowed without a stutter. The Meridian delegation watched the full presentation without interruption. When it ended, Bennett didn't clap. He folded his hands on the table, looked at Nathan Cole, and said, "We'll take it." The $5 million contract was signed before lunch. Pens on paper, handshakes across the conference table. The catering staff cleared untouched pastries while the legal teams exchanged documents. But Bennett wasn't finished. He asked Nathan for a private room, then invited Carter to join them. The three men sat at a small table in a glass-walled office on the east side of the floor. Afternoon light spilled through the windows, casting long rectangles across the carpet. Bennett placed a single sheet of paper on the table and slid it toward Carter. The paper was warm from the printer. Senior Infrastructure Architect, Meridian Corp. Full benefits, relocation package, equity stake. The salary is 6 times what you're making now. Bennett removed his glasses and set them beside the paper. I'm not offering this because of what happened in the server room. I'm offering it because I've owed you this conversation for 2 years. And I'm ashamed it took a crisis to make it happen. Nathan leaned forward, his tie loosened for the first time all day. Carter, I'd like to make a counteroffer. Stay at Pinnacle. Lead the infrastructure team. I'll match whatever Meridian puts on the table. Carter looked at the paper. He read the title, the salary, the benefits line by line. He read it twice. Then he looked up at Bennett, the man who had pushed him harder than any other professor, who had written the letter that launched his career, who had recognized him through a pane of reinforced glass in a janitor's uniform after 12 years. Then he looked at Nathan, the man who had given him a chance in the server room, but who had also signed his janitor contract 18 months ago without a second thought. "Professor Bennett," Carter said, "I'll take the position at Meridian." Nathan nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He understood. Bennett stood and extended his hand. Carter gripped it. Firm, steady, the handshake of a man accepting his own name back. When they released, Bennett said, "Meridian didn't just buy Pinnacle software today. We found something more valuable." He looked at Carter. "We found the man who saved it." The fallout at Pinnacle began that same afternoon. Nathan Cole ordered an internal investigation. The results arrived within 48 hours. The audit revealed that Derek Holloway had received 3 automated system alerts in the week before the demo. CPU spikes on the primary server, a corrupted DNS script, abnormal memory consumption in the analytics module. Derek had marked all 3 as reviewed, no action required. He had not investigated them, assigned them, or mentioned them in the pre-demo readiness meeting. His calendar showed 4 extended lunches, a golf outing with a vendor, and 0 hours on system monitoring. But the investigation uncovered something worse. HR's records showed that when Carter was hired 18 months earlier, the onboarding system had flagged his technical background and routed his resume to Derek's inbox. Carter's MIT degree, his Vertex Technologies experience, his network certifications, all forwarded on Carter's 3rd day of employment. Derek had opened the email, read the resume, and deleted it without forwarding it to Nathan or talent development. When confronted, Derek stared at the conference table, hands trembling against the wood, and said he didn't remember. The email logs disagreed. The read receipt was time-stamped at 8:14 a.m., 11 minutes before Derek told Carter to re-clean the east bathroom for the 3rd time. The investigator read the timestamp aloud. 6 seconds of silence. One of the HR representatives stopped writing and looked up. The board's decision was swift. Derek was stripped of his title and reassigned to junior technical support, help desk tickets on the night shift, the same hours Carter had spent mopping floors. His management authority was revoked. His office was cleared. On his first night shift, Derek walked past the supply closet where Carter had once restocked cleaning products. The hallway felt longer than he remembered. and his footsteps echoed in a way they never had during the day. 3 employees who had mocked Carter posted public apologies on Pinnacle's internal forum: the woman in the gray blazer, the developer who joked about toilets, a project manager who had laughed when Derek called Carter the help. The posts were voluntary. The story had spread in hours, and staying silent had become its own confession. Tessa Walsh wrote the longest post. She sat alone at her desk at 9 in the evening, monitor glowing in the dark office. She described watching Derek humiliate Carter and choosing to say nothing. She described the observation hallway and understanding that silence is a choice with weight. By morning, her post had more responses than any internal message in Pinnacle's history. Across the bay at Vertex Technologies, consequences landed harder. The audit that cleared Carter's name also uncovered evidence that Greg Palmer had falsified incident reports and manipulated logs, violations of federal data integrity statutes. Palmer was terminated. His engineering license was suspended. The industry that had blacklisted Carter Adams now had a new name on its exclusion list. Justice, when it arrived, was not dramatic. It was administrative. Emails, meeting minutes, revised org charts. But it was thorough and permanent. 6 months later, Carter Adams walked through Meridian Corp's glass doors with his daughter's hand in his. Sophie wore sneakers she had picked out herself. It was take your daughter to work day. They rode the elevator to the 9th floor. Carter's office had a window, a whiteboard covered in architecture diagrams, and a nameplate on the desk. Carter Adams, Senior Infrastructure Architect. Sophie traced the letters with her finger. Daddy, is this really yours? Carter knelt beside her. Every bit of it, baby. The mop is gone. The man remains. And sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the only one who can save the room. If someone ever told you that you'd never be more than what they see, drop a comment. Share this with someone who needs it. And subscribe, because stories like Carter's happen every day.